Hello and welcome to The Point. With a section of Bollywood issuing appeals to vote along secular lines, has India's film industry become polarized over the possibility of Narendra Modi winning the election? And is that an unhealthy or inevitable development? But first, the big story everyone woke up to this morning, Narendra Modi's interviews. Has he become an effective media communicator, or is that a mistaken impression created by the extensive coverage he's receiving? With me to analyze how to view Narendra Modi's communication skills are four of the top editors in the country. They are the former editor-in-chief of the Times of India, Dilip Padgaonkar, the chairman of the Business Standard, T.N. Nainan, the well-known television personality Nalini Singh, and the South Asia Bureau Chief of the Financial Times, Victor Mallet. Nalini Singh, let's start with the question that frames our discussion tonight. Do Mr. Modi's recent interviews suggest that he's become an effective media communicator, or is that a mistaken impression created by the extensive coverage he's getting?
Karan, I wouldn't agree with this one word that you use, has he become. I think he is an effective media communicator, and in fact I find that he's more effective in his relentless rallies, even more effective than he was in the interviews. In the interviews he tried to be mellow and tried to be, tried to take more time answering the questions than otherwise in his rallies he makes these sharp points. I would say that these interviews as well as the rallies give the impression of a strong personality. And today, Karan, all over the world, people are relating to strong personalities. And so he realizes that, and also that people say today that, we've said that the route to Delhi, the route to 7 Racecourse Road runs through UP. I would say, change that. The route to 7 Racecourse Road runs through the youth. And
all
for
right,
those
but
who
let's not expand onto subjects that are beyond our remit. What you're saying is he's now getting the recognition for his media skills that earlier he hadn't got.
Well, I don't know if he hadn't got. I think large parts of the country, large parts of the country actually responded to his media skills, to those rallies.
Dilip Padgaonkar, one thing that I did notice about that, in fact, Mr. Modi wasn't really challenged, he wasn't really cross-examined, his views therefore weren't inspected closely. Would the impression those interviews have left behind been very different if he had been challenged and he had been cross-questioned?
Well, I would recall your own interview with Mr. Modi, where he walked out in the house because the kind of pointed questions you were asking. I don't think Mr. Modi is ever going to agree to a strictly professional kind of an interview where tough questions are raised, but where also the kind of performance that he's had in Gujarat will be questioned. But let me put it this way, I'm talking about his oratorial skills, and these are without any question extremely impressive. I think he's got very good communication experts guiding him. However, the substance of what he has to say, I think, carries accents of demagoguery. And this is what makes it a bit, how should I say, dispiriting to see him talk. So good in style, great in style, impressive in style, but in substance, I'm afraid, a bit disturbing.
T.N. Nainan, let's come to some of that substance, and let's begin with some of the things he said which have attracted headline attention in the papers this morning. Were you surprised by his insistence, or at least affirmation, that there would be no vendetta or vindictiveness against Robert Vadra? Or do you think that was simply a clever reply to an awkward question, which at the moment, at any rate, can't be taken at face value? Which do you think it is?
Well, I don't understand why the issue is presented in those terms. If Mr. Vadra has broken the law, which I'm not sure he has, but if he has broken the law, then the law should take its course. There's no call for anybody to be vindictive, but there is call for the law to take its course. So to say I'm not vindictive, I certainly hope he's not vindictive, but will he stand in the way of the law taking its course?
Can I interrupt and put this to you? Perhaps one reason why he used the word vindictive is because earlier his colleague Uma Bharti had gone on record to say that Robert Vadra would be arrested if the NDA came to power. In the context of what she said, is Mr. Modi's claim that there will be no vindictiveness reassuring, or is it just a clever answer?
Well, I can't guess on the motives behind what he says. It's possible that he was responding to that question because of what Uma Bharti said.
Victor Mallet, one of the other issues on which Mr. Modi, many people thought, was surprisingly outspoken was the UPA government's handling of what's called the Vodafone issue. He immediately called it a betrayal of trust. He readily agreed that it had shattered investors' confidence. Now, given how critical this issue has been in putting off international investors, what sort of message do you think that comment by Mr. Modi has sent overseas?
Yeah, I think this is very important. He has said this. He has said this before. I think the important thing is that he's really tried to emphasize economic issues, and in particular issues that are of interest to investors who might create economic growth in the country. So this for him is a classic example of a government that has essentially lost in the courts, in the Supreme Court. The government lost to Vodafone, and has now come back and said, oh well, then we'll have to change the law and we'll have a retroactive law. And he's absolutely right that this was very, very negative for not only for foreign investors, but I think for Indian investors as well. So that's part of his strategy of focusing on economic issues, trying to forget about communal issues, or at least push them to one side, and really focus on this issue of jobs, aspiration, investment, and the economy.
So then, would you say that this was a clever move on his part, and one that will be received very well in London and New York?
Yes, but remember, he's not targeting those people right now. Right now, he's really targeting the voters. And I think what he tried to do in these interviews was to portray himself as statesman-like, somebody who could be trusted with the government. Okay. So you look at all the things he said were things that could be interpreted as being, you know, I will be a responsible prime minister. I will be someone who won't mess around with the constitution. He often uses the word constitution nowadays to show that he's not communalist. He is, you know, in tune with orthodox government, if you like, and that's the message he's getting across.
And one of the things I noticed was that although the interviewers did not question him on the economy, nor did Mr. Modi take any opportunity to talk about critical issues such as growth, creating jobs, or inflation. What do you make of his almost deliberate silence on those subjects?
Well, actually, I find this is a real problem, because we don't get any specifics on how they will address the economic issues that face the country. What you get from him is a series of alliterations, you know, 3 Ds, 4 Ms, 5 Ts, and so on, which to me don't make much sense. So, and beyond getting code words out like less government, more governance, what you actually going to do to address the problem of stagflation? You have high inflation and low growth. How are you going to deal with it? You have a problem with banking. You have a problem with the corporate sector and its debt level. These are not easy issues to resolve. And so if you think you're going to get the economy up and running again, how are you going to do it? There are no answers.
And given that the economy is one of the central focuses of his concern, and it will be a key part of the good governance he's offering, this silence in a sense is either bewildering or even possibly undermining. Would you agree with that?
Well, it could just as easily be that he doesn't see the need to address those questions just now, because he's addressing a large voter base. They're not interested in the specifics of economic management. And so he's dealing with what he wants to deal with now, and give catchphrases out so that people sort of buy that. Okay. And he will deal with the real issues when he comes into office.
Now, Dilip Padhankar, one of the issues...
It could be just that at the moment he...
Sorry, please finish, go ahead.
Sorry, it's just that he may not feel the need to address those issues just now.
But can I just say, sorry, I just want to say that, you know, you can't expect him to be talking about the lowering the rate of interest in order to spur the economy or changing the planning, the way the planning commission is, etc. I don't think, I think if these questions are asked, maybe they don't fall into the domain of the public, you know, the public connect that he's doing just now.
I didn't mean specifics, but don't you think he should have addressed or taken the opportunity to address core concerns like growth, like employment generation, like inflation, because those matter to people?
You know, I think what he's doing just now as a politician, he is targeting the sentiment on the economy. That is what he's targeting, that if this is going to change, that I will be able to create jobs, or the economy will be able to create jobs.
But the point is, he didn't mention those subjects.
I'm saying that I'm not just talking about the 2 interviews, but I think the general way in which he's connecting, especially with the youth, etc., is this. It's changing the
Dilip Padhankar, one of the issues that did for many strike, how should I put it, a jarring note, was Mr. Modi's attitude to skull caps. He told ANI that he refuses to wear one because he doesn't want to wear any symbol of appeasement. Yet in Punjab, when he went there for a rally, he was wearing a pagri. When he went to Itanagar, he was wearing local Arunachali headgear with horns on it. So is he being hypocritical, or would you agree with his assumption that somehow a skull cap is markedly different to a pagri or Arunachali headgear?
Hello?
Dilip Pathankar, did you hear that?
Yes, I heard you. Well, listen, all I can say is that within 48 hours after he said that wearing a skull cap was equivalent to appeasement of a particular community, his own party president adorned a skull cap when he went to meet a certain number of Muslim clerics in Lucknow. The question, therefore, that needs to be asked to Mr. Modi is Mr. Rajnath Singh also in the business of minority appeasement?
So would you therefore say that this issue of skull caps actually has revealed either an inconsistency or even a certain measure of hypocrisy in the awkward stand he takes on that whole issue?
Well, let's not forget, Karan, that a few days ago, he spoke about the so-called pink revolution. That's to say, the illegal export of beef by persons of a certain community and so on. You know, these are characteristic of a certain kind of ideological orientation that Mr. Modi has had. But I go along with what Nainan has just said. Please look at his speeches again, and you will find that on specifics, he simply isn't present. He doesn't say. I would have thought that at least after the publication of the BJP's manifesto, that he'd take some of the issues listed there and explain to the people what his party would do on this or the other issue if it came to power. Nothing other than bashing the Congress and the Gandhi family. There is precious little, really, that he has to communicate to the people of India.
But there's a very interesting corollary in your first answer, which is that despite the much mellowed smoothness that people have commented upon in those two interviews he did yesterday, sometimes without him even realizing it, a certain measure of prejudice or at least personal taste in the sense of wanting not to wear skull caps seeps through and perhaps undermines the smooth, suave exterior he's presenting. Am I understanding you correctly, or am I over-interpreting you?
No, I think you've understood me perfectly well. He does this again and again, depending also on the kind of audiences he addresses. Because I think there again he's very smart. He chooses subjects and themes and a language which would appeal to that particular audience. And there again, I think his communication strategists have been doing a great job.
Now, let me think, one of the things that I noticed was Mr. Modi asked, why should I wear a skull cap if Sonia Gandhi doesn't? But as an Indian, he should know women don't wear skull caps. And it's surprising that he therefore asked that question. Does that indicate a certain lapse of judgment, or at least lapse of knowledge on his part? Or is it just one of those accidental slips of the tongue that critics shouldn't make too much of?
Well, you know, I think that we are making too much of the skull cap. I think the skull cap is actually peaking. Now, I think that let's realize that he's a very shrewd politician, that he's probably got a Hindu versus Muslim embedded somewhere in his heart or being. Now,
when you say a Hindu versus Muslim something embedded, you mean prejudice?
I would say that the dichotomy, most people would just leave it at that. That he might be regarding
he sees the Muslim as the other.
No, he could be seeing the fact that these are also people that he has to integrate. I can't say, I cannot talk for him. But you know, if we carry on and on about the skull cap, then I'm going to have to ask you, have I worn a burqa? Had Sonia Gandhi worn a burqa? I'm just saying, we are taking this to an extent where it's going to lose its, you know, the sharpness is, he's mentioned Pakistani agent, he's mentioned AK-49, he's mentioned the pink revolution, as Dilip Pathankar is saying, he's mentioned those things. In a subtle way, he is doing that, okay. but he's leaving the heavy lifting on this particular question to others.
All right. I T.N. Nainan, have heard the admonition from Nalini Singh, but nonetheless, being a naughty boy, I'm going to persist with skull caps for a while. The skull cap controversy, in a sense, has become a symbol of Mr. Modi's attitude to secularism. Now, there's no doubt that in Delhi, when politicians host iftar parties or wear skull caps, they're doing it deliberately, consciously, to send out a message to the Muslim community. In not wearing a skull cap, would you say that Mr. Modi is trying to do away with meaningless symbolism, which so many Indians get attracted by? Or is he, in fact, as some people say, betraying prejudice? Which is it?
I would put to you a different proposition, Karan, which is he playing to his base? He's gone out on a development plank and on this Gujarat model business, and he does not want to go out on a communal agenda, even if others in the Sangh Parivar may be doing it. And yet he's signaling certain messages to his base, which is the pink revolution or the skull cap, and he needs to do that. I think so. He's doing it subtly and cleverly. So I don't think it's a signal to anybody else. It's a signal.
So what you're saying is he's talking at multiple levels to multiple audiences. A section of that interview that was talking to investors
he's a good politician and he's signaling the right things. He's a good politician. He's communicating effectively.
So this is a point at which, in fact, his handling of the media becomes astute, because he's managing to use one platform to speak to many people and send multiple messages.
You know, at some point you have to start carrying conviction. And I would go back to Dileep's original point that demagoguery is not a substitute for addressing real issues. I mean, he's addressed business chambers, he's addressed, I think, other business audiences. Surely there's an opportunity to communicate, because all of these people expect the economy to be handled better with the Modi government. So surely they need to understand, how are you going to do it?
Victor Mallet, you're used to politicians in the West using a media platform to speak to multiple audiences in and on multiple subjects all at the same time. That is, in a sense, what's considered the astuteness of a good politician. If you compare Mr. Modi's performances with those that you're more used to in England, do you think he's coming very close to that, being able to use one platform to speak to many people? Or is there a sense in which, and maybe this is what Nayanan is suggesting, I'm paraphrasing him, that he's getting confused in the process, and what should be the key message is getting not the attention it deserves, and other things are getting picked up instead?
Yeah, I mean, the skull cap issue is important because it's the one issue where he does look weak. And it's not that he won't wear a skull cap, it's that he will wear every other kind of headgear that's available from any group, whether religious or ethnic or regional. So that's the inconsistency there, and that's the point where he looks weakest. But I think we should go back to what Nayanan was saying earlier, which is that he's tried to focus on the economy, obviously, because it's an issue that everybody cares about, that voters care about. But he risks, because he's been so unspecific, I think there is a risk that he will sort of at least alienate the educated voters, who say, hang on a minute, let's get some specifics here. People do want specifics. Now, maybe it's true that the mass of voters don't care that much, and that we're at that stage in the election where that isn't important. But after the election, I mean, ironically, it may turn out to be that his greatest weakness is not the communal issue, the religious issue, but is the economic issue, the lack of specifics about what exactly the BJP and Modi plan to do if and when he becomes Prime Minister.
But there's a very interesting corollary which is unstated to what you've said, that you half accept the point Nalini Singh made that specifics would be wrong at this stage, and yet you're suspecting that behind the lack of specifics is perhaps a weakness on the economy, which will prove to be most disappointing if he becomes Prime Minister. Have I understood you correctly?
Yes, you have. But I think the important thing there is that Modi doesn't claim to be a brilliant economist. So the crucial thing will be who he chooses as his finance minister, who he chooses for his cabinet, and so on. And then we'll see what happens. I mean, I presume that he will delegate much of the running of the economy to people who know more about it than he does. And I think if he's a good leader, that's what he would do. And I imagine that that's the way he envisages it.
Absolutely, but those are, of course, issues.
Karan, if I may just come in on a specific.
Go ahead.
Just as an example, there is this charge that Rahul Gandhi threw at him, that he gave away land at ₹1 an acre or whatever it was to a businessman. Now this is a specific charge, and a lot of issues then get raised, and he has not even bothered to address it, saying is this true or not true, is there a reason for it, is there a justification for it. He just ignored it, and he wants to compare toffees with balloons, and you know, this is a very non-serious response to I think what is a serious charge. Either it's true or it's not true. If it's true, you need to explain it.
Do you think that
if it's not true, you need to simply say this is not true.
Do you think Mr. Modi made a mistake in not hitting back hard on that? Because the accusation of crony capitalism, or the toffee model as Rahul Gandhi called it, is a very serious one. Rahul claims that in fact he has facts and figures to prove it, although they haven't made it public. Surely Mr. Modi should have taken it at least more seriously rather than scoff at it. And was that a sign perhaps of not being as media astute as we are sort of suggesting he has become?
As far as I know, he's got somebody to respond to it.
But
and
not himself.
I think not himself, but he's got somebody from his team to say that that land, or whatever land is being talked about, was actually given out by Shankar Singh Waghela, who was at that time the chief minister. And
that was Nirmala Sitharaman on this program 2 days ago.
Well,
but
maybe.
Given that the charge was leveled at him, is it sensible to leave the answer to someone else?
Do you know something? If he gives an answer to this, if he repudiates it, then I would say that he's actually accepting this toffee model, and this 1 rupee. Okay. By the way, 1 rupee a meter also betrays the ignorance on the other side, which is right. 1 rupee a square meter.
Very quickly, Dilip Padgankar, because as usual, time is always our enemy, and particularly when the subject is as engrossing and interesting as this one. Mr. Modi also spoke about the media. After what's happened to Wendy Doniger's book, after the stories or the accounts that are doing the rounds of senior editors and journalists either resigning or losing their job because allegedly of their attitude about Mr. Modi, are you reassured about what he said about the media? His exact words were, "I pray for a strong media, and criticism is good for the nation." Is that reassuring, or would you say, what else could the man have said?
Karan, can I reply this in a different manner? I think right now, up to now, Mr. Modi has been sounding more like Enoch Powell than Margaret Thatcher. Once he becomes Prime Minister, it is likely that he will act and think and speak like Margaret Thatcher. All right? And if that is the case, then I think the fears that he's going to, bring heavy pressure to bear on the media and so on may be a bit exaggerated. But Mr. Modi's own record in this matter, as far as Gujarat is concerned, hasn't at all been very good, because I was a member of a three-member team from the Editors Guild of India who went to Gujarat and found out how the media behaved in Gujarat during the riots and after the riots. And everywhere the tune was the same: Mr. Modi does not tolerate dissent.
Okay. Very, very quickly, first Victor Mallet and then T.N. Nayanan, and I caution you that time is our enemy. Are you concerned, Victor Mallet, that Mr. Modi kept talking about what he called news traders, and he claimed that they were somehow sponsored? What do you make of that term, news traders? Or is it simply just a pejorative, derisory way of referring to journalists and papers he doesn't like? Or is there something more insidious behind it?
My guess is that he's simply saying that the media is often politically motivated or backed by political factions or people with a political agenda, which I'm afraid is true in some cases. So I wouldn't say it was anything more than that. But I think in the long term, yeah, we should be certainly watchful of what happens to the media under a Modi prime ministership.
Very, very quickly, Mr. Nayanan, it's no secret that many journalists are fearful of what will happen to journalism and perhaps potential censorship if Mr. Modi becomes prime minister. Are those, in your eyes, justified fears, or are they unwarranted?
I think there is room for some wariness, but nothing beyond that as yet. There is nothing to suggest that we will go immediately into the dark days of the emergency and press censorship. And certainly I don't even think he'd be able to do it. And it's a different world today from what it was 40 years ago. So I don't think we need to get, all depressed and gloomy about what's coming.
All right.
But there is room for wariness. I mean, I think there are lots of stories going around about how he dealt with stuff. So there is room for some wariness.
All right. On that note, which I think is a particularly sober, balanced one, need for wariness, but let's not exaggerate. Let's not get unnecessarily concerned. We come to the end of this episode. My thanks to all 4 of my guests for joining me.